Now this right here, the picture you're seeing right here is a Falasha, Israelite, Beta Israel, teenager, and man. Look carefully at the features, right? Now some would say, well, they don't look like any African American, really. They don't look like no African American. They don't like no brothers from the Caribbean. Are you sure? They don't look like any of our so-called Spanish-speaking Israelites. Are you sure? Are you correct? Well, let's go to another picture. So here's an elderly Beta Israel or so-called Falasha couple. It's another picture of our people, our persecuted people. Why do you think some of the Beta Israel tell you that they were persecuted in Ethiopia? And especially after His Imperial Majesty was said to be overthrown, their persecution increased. So when you hear some of these so-called Ethiopians bigging up Mengistu Haile Mariam, that traitor, that fox, that serpent, you understand, he was persecuting our people. And if you ever wonder why they hate His Imperial Majesty, it's because they hate you as Beta Israel. If they hate the King of Kings who's a Hebrew, you know they hate you Negroes because he gave us our foothold of land in the Promised Land. He returned to us what some of the so-called Hamites took from us. You see, there's Hamite groups and there's Shemite groups. You can't judge them just by so-called physical, facial characteristics. You see, it's a spiritual battle. You know, it's overstanding. You just can't judge it by that. Because look at this group right here of Falasha protesters in Israel. These Beta Israelites in Israel. You understand? Now, since their discovery in 1948, their discovery, and we put quotation marks around that, their so-called discovery in 1948, Beta Israel, they've been subjected to various European masters. Now how they master them? They master them by the con game of Jewishism, of being Jewish. You understand? And pretending to the Falashas, the Beta Israel, that listen, we're Israelites too. We're just white. And somehow the Beta Israel forgot who's who on the face of the planet Earth. But when they get over there in the so-called state of Jezreel, of Israel, they begin to find out how much those so-called white European Jews are not like you. If they were the same people, then they would treat the Ethiopian so-called Jews the same way they treat the Russian Jews, the same way they treat the European Jews, the Polish Jews, the rest of them. Don't ask me. Don't believe what we're saying. Ask the Beta Israel. Ask them. Not some of these guys that they put up there and you know, they'll put a little extra shekels in their pocket, and these guys will say anything. Remember, Judas Iscariot, he was a Beta Israel. He was an Israelite. So we have good Israelites and bad Israelites. We got to recognize that. But in Ethiopia, many of them were converted into Christians, so-called Orthodox Christians. Now, during the 1930s, this is a very interesting point and period in our history. During the 1930s, Ethiopia was the last independent African, and should we say Hebrew, nation with sovereign authority and in a God-given covenant with the Almighty Creator of the heavens, the earth, and the seas, and all that is therein. Now, every other nation in Africa had been colonized by European powers. Isn't this interesting? Every other nation in Africa was colonized by European. So what made Ethiopia in that sense so special? It was an African nation. It was that Hebrew covenant. Even the kebra nagast, what they call the Queen of Sheba and the only son Menelik, tells you that. It's the authority that comes from being Hebrew. You understand? However, let's look at what happened in his story. Then, around 1936, 37, after the crowning of Haile Selassie I, Ethiopia was invaded, temporarily occupied for about 5 years, and according to the Roman Catholics, who backed fascist dictator Mussolini. In fact, the Catholics say that their preferred form of government, the Vatican, actually, the Pope They said their preferred form of government of Catholicism is fascism. Go look it up. It's out there. So Mussolini was backed by the Roman Catholic Church. So this enmity against Hebrews is deep. It's real deep. And some of you niggas are asleep. A lot of you are sleeping on this. You understand? You're trying to make excuses, trying to be, apologists, trying to be intellectuals and trying to reason around it, when if you look at the plain truth, it's just the plain truth. But when we look at the Cold War period that developed in Ethiopia roughly from like 1948 through the so-called creeping coup against Haile Selassie and that Hebrew authority in Ethiopia to 1985, we have to look at how the role of the United States and the role of the USSR, or the role of capitalism and communism, was in Ethiopia. Now, the U.S. and the English helped to restore the rightful government of Haile Selassie I. You see, because there was a judgment that was going on. Look what happened to England when England played games with the King of Kings. England was almost destroyed. England economy, England has lost everything. The Queen of England, she came over here the other day, and the newsman said something very interesting. The newsman said on the news, he said that about, 30, 40 or something years ago, like when the Queen of England first came back in 1950s or 60s or something, she was this new ruler and everything of, England, and they controlled the world. They had all these colonies. They were a real empire. Now, they just have a little island states. You know which islands they have? These niggas up in the Caribbean, these other niggas over there. They got these niggas on these little islands, but they lost all of that. They went from being a so-called imperial power to a figurehead with a queen who's on welfare, who's on public welfare, while she's still making her dollars of exploitation. You see, she has a judgment as well because of that betrayal of Haile Selassie. Haile Selassie came to their aid when they decided to come to the Ethiopian Hebrew aid during the time of the fascist invasion, and then the Queen of England and her other puppets and the other people under her dress played games with the King of Kings. But be that as it may, let's look at the role of the United States. The role of the United States in Haile Selassie's government was close. But you see, we had some dumb-ass niggas over here that didn't really recognize it. They didn't get it. You see, they really didn't get this close relation. Some say, oh, Haile Selassie, he was Uncle Tom. Where are these niggas talking from? They're living in America. They're going back and forth and doing their little American bit, and they're talking about Haile Selassie. If Haile Selassie is Uncle Tom because he's trying to make a bridge to the lost sheep over here, what are you? Just a lost sheep about to be slaughtered by the Antichrist, which you probably voted for. But let that be what that will be. But after the so-called revolution, the creeping coup, the rebellion against Haile Selassie I, U.S. forces withdrew from Ethiopia, the communist influence took over, and these Hamites who hate the Shemites and hate that Solomonic, that Davidic, that Haile Selassie, that 3,000-year-old biblical covenant, you understand? They began to put pressure on the Hebrews, and gradually the Hebrews were massacred, were slaughtered, were chased out of power. That's what really happened in the revolution, so-called Ethiopian revolution. Historically, it's the Beta Israel that ruled Ethiopia from the times of King Solomon until the end of Haile Selassie, the first visible government in Ethiopia. And this is the very interesting point and the very interesting connection that nobody wants to tell you.